Anyways, that song I just picked a little bit for a testimony. Yeah, I think we're all needy people. It's just that we sometimes have a hard time admitting our need, which I do. But here I am, I'm admitting to you. I need you, I need Christ. All right, let's rise up and stand. We see if we can crank it up a little bit. You know, the first song, it's nice if you can sit and kind of get warmed up. But, we are going to build God's kingdom. I like those fans, but they kind of drown out our bass singers. But we can. Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope, like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power in us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. Refuse to waste our lives, for you're our joy and prize. To see the captives' hearts released, the hurt, the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We pray, revive this earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray. Unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for much more than this. Awake the kingdom seed in us. Fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church. We are the hope on earth. are here to build the kingdom of God in your heart and in the hearts of those that your life touches and blesses you. All right, the goodness of God. This is a fairly new song. I think most of you have probably heard it before. I don't know if anyone has sang it. Has sung. I'm an English teacher. I'm not an English teacher. I think we're going to sing along to a recording here to help us. So we have our 4 parts here, and if you go to the next slide, Daryl, you'll notice that towards the end of that first stanza, the bass really takes it away and runs with it, and I think it's beautiful. So bass singers out there, crank it up, all right? All right, so I'm going to just play it through my phone here, so we'll sing along here, and then maybe sometime in the future we'll be able to sing it just by ourselves. Amen. Thank you for singing that with me. All right, I have one more song. This song is for the children, although it's not necessarily a children's song. And again, on a Sunday morning, I know for myself, when I'm in the back, when I'm taking care of my kids, and the song leader's like, okay, the men sing song verse 3, the women sing verse 4. I'm back there like, yeah, what did you say? Oh, can you say that again? So I'm going to repeat myself here. On the first verse, we'll just all sing. Everybody sing. Chorus, everybody sing. All right? On the second verse, I want to hear the kids rise up. Kids, children. Children, 12 and under, all right? I think we have enough 12 and unders in here. So the 12 and unders, and here's the chorus, for the Lord is good and faithful. 12 and unders, you guys are going to sing this verse, all right? And then everybody will come back in for the chorus, and then we'll all sing the last verse and the last chorus, all right? All right, so everybody together. I did not think about my pitch. Wayne, where are you at? Can you give me what do you think would be right? I think I got it. I'll try this. Jesus said that if I thirst, I should come to Him. No one else can satisfy. I should come to Him. Jesus said, if I am weak, I should come to Him. No one else can be my strength. I should come to Him. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Children, Jesus said that if I louder. Good job. Good job. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Jesus said, if I am lost, He will come to me. And He showed me on that cross, He will come to me. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Jesus strong and kind.
Good morning. Welcome everyone again. Morning. All right, so we were singing the songs about Jesus, and one song, Build Your Kingdom Here, was talking about different things, so talking about the strength of God. And the thought that went through my mind was, do you really believe what you're singing? Do you believe that God can build His kingdom here? Do you believe that He can heal our streets and land? Do you believe that He could set the church on fire? And I'm not sure where all Daryl's going this morning because he's talking about trust. If you can turn to Acts chapter 17, we're going to read some verses there. We're going to break in kind of the middle of the story. This is where Paul was talking to the men of Athens, and he noticed that they had an altar to an unknown God. And so my mind was kind of going down that track as we were singing. And I was wondering how many times are we singing these songs, are we singing to an unknown God? Do you know the God that you're singing about, that you're singing to?
A little bit of sickness, but I'm thankful to be feeling better this morning than I was. So this week, one of the things that happened in my life was a John Deere salesman, which all of our equipment at Wexcon is Deere for the most part, and asked if some of us would come out to Iowa to one of their factories and test out some of their new technology, underground radar systems they have to scan for underground utilities. They have that integrated into an excavator bucket now where they can supposedly sense things underground. So for our kind of work, that would be something that sounds very attractive, and they're trying to get feedback from contractors to see if this is something that is viable for future investment and things like that. So myself and another person from work flew out there, and but yeah, this will be a fun little 2-day trip, overnight one night, and back to Harrisburg. And well, right before I left, I started feeling a tickle in my throat, and then I got pretty much of a migraine, and I checked the weather forecast for out there. Well, I need a sweatshirt or not, and I pull up the weather forecast for Dubuque, Iowa, and it says excessive heat warning, hottest day of the year, real feel of 111, and wow, so this turned into a little bit more of a miserable trip than I was expecting. It was still good, but anyway, I say all that to say I was thinking about what to preach, and I had already decided to go back to the book of Joshua. So if you would turn there, turn to Joshua chapter 15. Believe it or not, it's been since the end of February, I think, since I preached from Joshua. And so to consider it a series might feel a little bit disjointed, but there is some good sermons left in the book of Joshua. And we got to this point here of Joshua 15 where it's time to allot all the land to the 12 tribes of Israel. And so we're going to be looking at 5 chapters this morning. I've been going through chapter by chapter, but we have 5 chapters today. There's no fellowship meal, so hopefully we're done by the time song service starts, and we'll be good. But these 5 chapters talk about the dividing of the land. Just reading them at face value, we're not going to read them, by the way, just so you don't get worried, but could seem a bit boring. We can lose you pretty quick, I think. There's a lot of names in here of places that are hard to pronounce. There's a lot of names of people that are hard to pronounce. Some of these names you can't even tell if they're a man or a woman, and things like that. But there's a lot of underlying things about these places that are interesting to dive into, and that's what I love about studying the Bible. There's so many different layers, and lots of things the places could bring into the text, and also the people and the different tribes and the prophecies that were being fulfilled. So I was trying to think about how to what can we take if we fly over these chapters at 30,000 feet, so to speak, and try to get a zoomed out view of what's going on. What can we take away from this that is practical? What should we look to pull out of this for our own lives? And so I was out there in Iowa, and it didn't dawn on me until Friday evening after I was home. I was like, that's it. I think that's the common denominator in these chapters. When we were out in Iowa, the title of our message today, by the way, is Proving Grounds. And we were given directions to go to the John Deere Proving Grounds at their facility. And when we were driving up there, I said to my partner there, Dwayne, said, kind of a funny name. How do they think it would be like a demonstration area or a testing area, or they call it a proving grounds. This is where they take their equipment and run tests on them, and they have dirt piles and whatever, and they can, see if the equipment actually does what it was designed to do, and if it'll perform as advertised. So this is a little picture. I didn't go around taking pictures out there, but that's one picture I took of their proving grounds. There's a lot bigger area. It used to actually be an airport they bought next door to play in the dirt, basically. So they're always doing testing out there on their equipment. But as I was thinking about Israel and the 12 tribes getting allotted their land, I thought this is a pretty good picture of Israel's proving grounds. And that of the 12 tribes, these are all the different colors represent different tribes, the portion that was given to that tribe. And so rather than reading all of these areas, the written description of their boundaries, it's a lot easier for you just to look up there and say, okay, this is chapter 15 to 19. This was the end result. These are the boundaries that were drawn for them without listing all the cities. Now we're at a point, if you remember last time in chapter 14, where Caleb, up until this point, Joshua was leading the national army. This was a national conquest to go in and take the land of Canaan. Caleb came to Joshua in chapter 14 and said, hey, it's time for me to take my mountain. Give me the land that Moses promised me, because I followed the Lord wholeheartedly. And in the end of chapter 14, 3 times in the NIV, it uses the word wholeheartedly. Because Caleb followed wholeheartedly. He gave a good report from the spies when they spied out Canaan, and he never lost the faith. It was 45 years ago, he says, I was 40 years old, and I'm still just as strong today at 85 as I was back then, and I want to go take that land. So Caleb was from the tribe of Judah. So Judah was the first tribe to be given the green light to go ahead, go take your portion, go claim it for yourselves. So we're transitioning here from a national conquest to subdue the whole land of Canaan, which was everything on the west side of the Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. This is the land of Canaan. And 3 of the tribes, 2.5 of the tribes actually got portions before they crossed Jordan. We learned that many weeks ago. But so Judah moves forward at Caleb's leadership to go in and conquer their portion. So we're moving to a tribal campaign now to get their areas rather than a national campaign. Caleb said back in Numbers, when he gave the report from the spies, says he silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Can we say that together? We can certainly do it. And here in Joshua, 45 years later, he says, the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. Can we say that together? I will drive them out. So, say the first one again. We can certainly do it. I will drive them out. I hope that is something we can be motivated to do here as we look at what the tribes were commanded or expected to do in their proving grounds. Would they actually follow through on their word like Caleb did? Caleb was the lead example. Also, just wanted to note that back in Numbers, the Lord gave Moses some specific instructions on how you should divide these land portions. He said in Numbers 26, the land is to be allotted to them as an inheritance based on the number of names. So they took a long census. You can see in Numbers chapter 26, there's a census of all the numbers, how many are in each tribe. To a larger group, give a larger inheritance. To a smaller group, a smaller one. Each is to receive its inheritance according to the number of those listed. Be sure that the land is distributed by lot. What each group inherits will be according to the names for its ancestral tribe. Each inheritance is to be distributed by lot among the larger and smaller groups. as we go through these allotments, notice how God is very sensitive to the needs, the situations, the circumstances of each tribe. He's a just and a fair God, and he gives to each tribe according to what they needed or what he had his purposes for them. And be sure that the land is distributed by lot. I think that was a very important key, because as you can see later on, there will be cause for some conflict maybe about who gets the best land or how much land they should get. And using the lot definitely helped avoid a lot of the heartache that Joshua could have faced by taking the blame for all that, whereas God drew the boundaries. As Dwayne read in Acts 17, we might refer to that more at the end of the message, but God has placed around each one of us boundaries. He's placed us in a certain period of history with certain boundaries, a certain geographical area, a certain family, and he has a purpose in that for each of us. And are we going to be faithful as he puts us in this life, on this proving ground, by the way? This life is our proving ground to prove if we're actually going to follow through on the faith that we profess and pray as his people. Now, before we get into all these allotments, I wanted to just look at the 12 tribes of Israel. How many of you can, maybe I should back up, how many of you could name these by memory, the 12 tribes of Israel? I remember memorizing the presidents of the United States when I was in school. Did you ever memorize the 12 tribes of Israel? No? About the 12 disciples. That's a little off topic. So the 12 tribes of Israel, I put them under who their mothers were. Okay, but these are listed in order, starting over here. Firstborn, you know the story of Jacob. He worked for Laban 7 years, and he wanted Rachel to be his wife. Well, Laban deceived him, gave him Leah. Well, then with Leah, he had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Judah was actually the fourth-born. I had to refresh my memory on this, Reuben being the firstborn. Then, we know that Jacob was very upset. Well, he didn't get the wife he bargained for, and so he worked another 7 years for Rachel. Now, he didn't wait 7 years for Rachel. I think he got married within the next week or so, but then he worked another 7 years after that for Rachel. Somehow, I'm not quite sure on the timing of that, but it seems like he worked after he got Rachel. But Leah felt very rejected and unloved, but she was the only one bearing children. Rachel realized that she was not able to bear children, and so she said, Jacob, you take my servant, my handmaid, Bilhah, and you have some children with her. So he had Dan and Naphtali. Well, then Leah stopped having children, was unable to bear more children, and she started getting worried about this. So she said, Jacob, you need to have some children with my servant, Zilpah. So he had Gad and Asher with her servant. Well, then Leah was praying that she could have more children, and God granted that request. She started, actually Reuben, her oldest son, went out and got some mandrakes and brought them in, and they bargained. Rachel made a bargain with him to get the mandrakes from him. I don't know, you have to go back and read the story. But anyway, Jacob comes in from the field, and Leah says, because of the bargain of Reuben giving his mandrakes to Rachel, you need to have more children with me. So this is, I know this is a little bit getting in the weeds. But anyway, Leah had 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun. And then God blessed Rachel with 2 children, Joseph and Benjamin. She died in childbearing with Benjamin on the way to, I forget where they were heading, but he buried her near Bethlehem, I think it was. Bethlehem. And so, those are the 12 sons of Jacob. It's a brief history, but it's interesting, even diving deeper into the history, which we don't have time for today. A lot of this history plays on where they were placed in the land, and how God blessed each tribe according to some of this stuff. So that's a brief overview of the tribes. Now here is a picture of the land for a lot of these tribes, and here's a list of all of Jacob's sons. Does anybody notice, you haven't, maybe you can't even see it in the back, but there's a couple names over here that are not over here. Does anybody know why the reason for that is? First of all, what names are missing from this list that weren't allotted land over here? Levi and Joseph. You're right. Levi and Joseph. So God had a plan for the Levites, and you can see this in Jacob's blessing his sons before he passed away, that the Levites and the Simeonites would be scattered throughout the land. So that prophecy came true when the Levites were chosen as God's priestly line to be priests. They did not get a plot of land. They just were going to be scattered in certain towns that were designated for them to carry out priestly duties within all the land of Canaan. So they did not get their own portion of land. And Simeon actually took some land from Judah. God gave some land to Simeon because Judah had more than they needed. So they were both, in a way, scattered through the land. And Joseph is not over here, but two of Joseph's sons, I don't know if I should get into this now or later, but two of Joseph's Egyptian-born sons. Remember, Joseph helped the family survive during the drought by going to Egypt and saving all the food, and all these brothers went down there to get food, and Joseph saved them. God really blessed Joseph. But Joseph didn't get his own piece of land. Right before Jacob died, Joseph's father, he called all his sons and gave this blessing that you can see in Genesis 29, I believe. And Joseph brought his sons Ephraim and Manasseh to Jacob to be blessed. And Jacob said, Reuben, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I say it anyway since I'm here. Reuben was cursed as his firstborn son because Reuben had actually defiled the bed with Bilhah, Rachel's servant. And so Jacob said, you are cursed. He lost his firstborn rights, and Jacob gave the firstborn rights to Joseph. But rather than giving them just to Joseph, he adopted Joseph's two eldest sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and gave the birthright to them. And so Joseph brings his sons to Jacob for a blessing, and he was careful to put Manasseh, the oldest one, on his left, so that when Jacob was facing him, it would be on his right, because the oldest got the right hand blessing. And he put Ephraim on his right hand because he wanted Jacob's left hand to be on it. Brings his sons to Jacob, and Jacob can hardly see. Looks like he was bedridden, and he was so old, it says he revived enough to sit up in his bed and gave this blessing, but he crossed his arms and blessed the sons. And Joseph said, no. He tried to correct him. The eldest is on your right. He said, no, I will bless whom I will bless. And he blessed Ephraim with the eldest firstborn son blessing. So Ephraim and Manasseh were adopted to Jacob as their sons. They actually became Joseph's brothers, so to speak. Imagine your dad becoming your brother. Isn't that kind of ironic? But so Ephraim and Manasseh represent Joseph here on the map. That's a little explanation of why Joseph's name isn't on there. I hope I didn't go too fast on that. But Ephraim and Manasseh represent Joseph. What's interesting is Manasseh was the firstborn son. And it seems like, wow, he really got chipped of the firstborn blessing. But as we see through all this, God is very faithful in looking out for each of the needs and being fair for each family. And Manasseh, the firstborn son, receives a double portion, right? So half the tribe of Manasseh got a plot of land on the east side of the Jordan before they crossed. And then the other half, after they crossed, got a portion in the promised land. And therefore, Manasseh still ended up with a double portion according to the firstborn, the traditional firstborn blessing. So let's get into how the land was allotted for Judah. In chapter 15, right here I had some slides, I thought they were down further, but this is the curse. This is when Jacob was blessing his sons. In Genesis 49, you can read down over all the blessings of each of his sons. And to Reuben he says, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, turbulent as the waters. You will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and you plowed it. And therefore, Reuben lost the firstborn blessing. This was Jacob's blessing then on Judah, the fourthborn. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. So Judah was the tribe, the line of royalty in the family. This is the line that would hold the scepter, which symbolized rulership, and ultimately the line of David and Jesus would be born through Judah's line. The ancient rabbis at this time interpreted this prophecy as a messianic prophecy. They said, the scepter will not depart from Judah, or the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whom it belongs shall come. This was a reference to the Messiah. So all the rabbis thought Judah will rule until the Messiah comes. What's interesting is, and I want us to get this morning, because as we're in our boundaries, as we're living life on our proving grounds, God is working in the background. Don't feel like you're forsaken and God forgot all about you. But this is just one example that we have recorded in the Jewish Talmud. It says when the Romans came in 1,000 years later to take over the land of Canaan, the Romans took rulership over it, and they took away the right of the Israelites to exercise capital punishment. So they didn't have the right to adjudicate in capital cases, like to execute people for offenses. That's why the Romans executed Jesus rather than the Jews, because the Jews no longer had that right. But this happened before, in quotes, the Messiah came. And the right of rulership was taken away. And so the Jewish Talmud records that the Jewish Sanhedrin paraded the streets of Jerusalem in sackcloth and ashes, saying, the scepter has departed Judah, but the Messiah has not come. And the Sanhedrin were weeping because the scepter was taken, and they thought God had fallen short of his promise. What they didn't realize was just a few miles away in Nazareth, the Messiah was getting ready to come and take back the scepter to rule from the line of the tribe of Judah. Isn't that pretty amazing to think about God is working behind the scenes in our own lives? When we're on the proving grounds and it seems like maybe God is forsaking us. So anyway, the allotment of Judah, I think I'll read, go back to the map, in chapter 15. Let's read verses 13 to 19. I tried to pick a few sections out here so as not to bore you with all the town names that have meaning, but maybe not on the surface for us this morning. So chapter 15, verse 13, it says, in accordance with the Lord's command to him, Joshua gave Caleb, son of Jephunneh, a portion of Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the fourth father of Anak. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the three Anakites, Shishai, Ammon, and Talmi, the sons of Anak. Now we learned last time when Caleb asked for this, Anak was the father of the giants who the Philistines came from. So Goliath would have come from them, and these were giant men with 6 fingers and 6 toes. So this is the stuff that Caleb wanted to conquer at 85 years old. From there, he marched against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. Now, why did Caleb do that? He just conquered Hebron. He goes on to conquer Debir, and then he says, you know what? I'm going to give my daughter to somebody who would step up and conquer this town for me. But he had just said he's as strong now as he was 45 years ago. Why would he ask somebody else to do this? And it appears at first glance that he's using his daughter as a bargaining chip, pretty much debasing her value and just saying, hey, I'll give you my daughter if you can conquer this town for me. Is that what's actually going on? As I thought about this more and thought about the proving grounds, I think this was a proving grounds that Caleb was laying out for his future son-in-law. Caleb was concerned about carrying on the faith, and his daughter seems very responsible in her responses here. But Caleb wanted somebody that was going to step up to the plate and follow through on his faith and say, I can drive them out. So Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksa to him in marriage. I think that was what better proving grounds for a future son-in-law than to ask him to conquer a city for you. That was a good way for Caleb to know that maybe this was a man of character. If you turn over to Judges chapter 3, I believe it is, Othniel turns out to be the first judge that Israel had in the period of the Judges. He rose up to be a man of character. And so then it says in verse 18, one day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what can I do for you? She replied, do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. So here we see a woman that was looking in the future. They were given a portion of land, but she's like, well, we got desert. We're going to need some water too. And Caleb, with the heart of a father, gave her some springs as well. So I just see that as a little sub-proving ground in all this. Another interesting note here in Judah's allotment is the next verses down. There's a list of 29 towns. It lists a bunch of towns, and in verse 32 it says a total of 29 towns and their villages. Well, if you take the time to count all those towns, there's 36 listed there. So some people say, well, here's another example of where the Bible's not accurate and you can't follow what it says. But if you would stay with us for a couple more chapters, when we get to the land, the allotment for Simeon, it will tell us that Simeon was taken from Judah because they had too much, and 7 of those towns of the 36 were given to Simeon. So it still comes out mathematically for those who are concerned about that. Thank you for bearing with my voice today. I'm just very thankful that it's a lot better than it was yesterday. So let's drop down to the last verse of this chapter in chapter 15. Look, we're almost done with one chapter already. Chapter 15, verse 63. There's a couple of these verses that are very sobering. It says, Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. It's a little disheartening after you hear of all the conquering going on and claiming their territory. But the Jebusites were those who occupied Jerusalem. And Jerusalem would not be conquered for another over 1,000 years until David would come and conquer Jerusalem. Thus it became known as the city of David. And David went up through the aqueduct, which is still there to this day, between Torin, to conquer the city of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was a very fortified place, hard to get at in the hill country there. Moving on to chapter 16. says, the allotment for Joseph began at the Jordan east of the springs of Jericho. We knew that Jericho was the city of palms. We go into a bunch of cities again, but the allotment for Joseph. Well, we know Joseph's not listed here, but it goes into saying that this was, let's see here, verse 4, so Manasseh and Ephraim, the descendants of Joseph, received their inheritance. This was the territory of Ephraim according to its clans. So it goes through and names the area that Ephraim would claim. And then there's another sobering verse. At the end of chapter 16 it says, they did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. Well, at least that's a little better. I guess they got them to do forced labor, right? But so there we have the allotment for Ephraim. Look, we're already done with 2 chapters. Chapter 17. This is the allotment for Manasseh. Let's read verses 1 to 6 here. This is the allotment for the tribe of Manasseh as Joseph's firstborn, that is, for Machir, Manasseh's firstborn. Machir was the ancestor of the Gileadites, who had received Gilead and Bashan because the Machirites were great soldiers. So the sons of Manasseh were great soldiers. So this allotment was for the rest of the people of Manasseh. Some different clans he names there. These are the other male descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph. I'll get there. By their clans. Now here's another interesting section that just notice that God is aware of the needs of his people. Now, Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons, but only daughters, whose names were, now these names, if you're name shopping, Jesse and Carissa, here's some good ones to avoid. Mahlah, Mela, Noah, I didn't know that was a bisexual name. Noah, Paula, and Milcah. Tears is a pretty nice name. But anyway, those 5 daughters, they went out to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders said, the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our relatives. So Joshua gave them an inheritance along with the brothers of their father according to the Lord's command. Manasseh's share consisted of 10 tracts of land beside Gilead and Bashan east of the Jordan, because the daughters of the tribe of Manasseh received an inheritance among the sons. The daughters received an inheritance among the sons. If you go back to Numbers, these daughters came to Moses before Moses passed off the scene and transitioned to Joshua. They were concerned about their inheritance. They didn't have any male representation. You could say this is the first feminist movement, you might say. But it's not feminist in the way we would think of it. God's intention was never to minimize women. Women are equal in God's sight in value. And even in this Old Testament, very patriarchal setting or culture, when we can see some things in the Bible that appear to be very patriarchal and might appear to put down women, but whenever that is brought to God and put before God and said, what do you think? God always includes them in with his people, with his purposes. And so these women approached Moses. It says, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers. If you remember the rebellion of Korah, where some men kind of gathered against Moses and Aaron, and the end result was the earth opening up and swallowing 250 of them alive, and some fire came down and destroyed others, and it was a big rebellion. Evidently, Zelophehad was not part of that. It says he was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. I just thought that was interesting that it's written that way. He died for his own sin. God didn't hold these daughters responsible for their father's sin. There was a way to break free of that family curse. It says, why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? give us property among our father's relatives. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and give their father's inheritance to them. And so we see here in Joshua chapter 17, the daughters of the tribe of Manasseh received an inheritance among the sons. And we are sons and daughters as part of the body of Christ. Amen. Moving on then in chapter 17, the area that Manasseh was given. I had written some places of interest in each area, but we don't have time to cover them, so I've been skipping them. But I couldn't help myself hardly on these couple, because if you look at verse 11, chapter 17:11, the area of Manasseh, it mentions Beth-shan and Megiddo, and it says in verse 12, yet the Manassites were not able to occupy these towns, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that region. Another one of these sobering verses. However, when the Israelites grew stronger, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. Now, if I can back up to the map here. Megiddo, that's listed in Beth-shan, are at either end of the Jezreel Valley. Megiddo, these are two cities that we visited when we were over in Israel, and I found it very interesting that this valley right here, you can see a river running through it, but it's a very fertile valley, very wide, fertile, and there's Mount Carmel ranges here. But Megiddo was probably the most fought over city in the land over history in that territory. Whenever somebody would come in to conquer the area, they wanted to get Megiddo because it guarded the Jezreel Valley at that end. And then at the south end, Beth-shan was at the other end, and this was the main pass to get from the sea back in here to the Jordan Valley. So whenever armies would want to come through, they'd come up through Beth-shan and Megiddo. Megiddo might be more commonly known among us, is translated in Revelation as Armageddon. It is the name Armageddon, and this is the valley of Armageddon. And so these two cities were very fascinating for us. I'm just going to quickly show you a couple pictures, but these were taken with my own camera, so they're not just off the internet. But this is Beth-shan, and some of the most fascinating archaeological finds that you'll find are in this town over there. But the way they made the streets, they had crown in the road and curb on the sides. They had colonnades, and behind these colonnades, they were roofed porches, and they'd have shops then behind the sidewalks on both sides. This was the main street. In the background, you see Mount Gilboa. This is also in Beth-shan. This was one of their outdoor arenas. This was very sobering for me to be in, because this was a Canaanite city. A lot of wickedness went on here, idol worship, and even after the Israelites were in and Christianity came about, hard telling what stories could be told from this floor. As I walked across that floor, obviously that's been redone down there. These are some of the original seats with the stone kind of breaking away. But I thought, this is a place where we aren't even worthy to walk. If this is where Christians were persecuted or things like that. I don't know exactly what went on with this specific one, but chances are high there was a lot of gladiator activity here and things like that. So, and the remains, lots of remains here in this town. I just put this on for fun because I think this is fascinating, but this was a public bathhouse, and you wonder what all these mushroom things are. They actually had like 2 foot by 2 foot tiles. I don't know if they were stone or marble, but that would sit, these are actually piers that they'd sit the tiles on. So the floor was raised, and hot water would flow through them underneath, and they had furnaces that would, out here, that would put the hot water through and steam it up. It was like a sauna. They had like, yeah, public bathhouses. I didn't know they were so advanced back then. But, and then I also have a picture of a public restroom here. There was a trough under here that water flowed in all the time, and these were toilet seats. So that's just for free. Not such nice stalls here. Then Megiddo, on the other end of the valley, was, these are just some pictures. They had an awesome water shaft to get water into the city from outside. And we walked down these stairs, we're about 100 some feet down there, and they have the shaft open, you can walk across the bottom, there's still a little bit of water in there. But amazing amounts of technology, you could call it, back then. This was in Megiddo, like a grain bin where they had a spiral staircase coming down, grain storage bin. You can see it was raised out there to the valley of Armageddon. And this picture, I found this fascinating. This was the area of Megiddo that was traditionally looked at as the area of worship. Sometimes this town was controlled by pagans, and sometimes, at one time, by the Hebrews. But Megiddo is a tell, which means it's a layered city. I don't know how many layers it is, but you can see they've excavated down. When they got down to this layer, they found this altar, and all these rocks are not cut rocks. And that's one way they determined if it was a Hebrew settlement. And so this is most likely the layer where the Hebrew children of Israel inhabited, because they had this altar of unhewn rocks that were just naturally laid. So anyway, that's a little archaeology. That's what I love about the Bible, though. These are real stories with real places that have real relevance to our own lives today, right? And it's not just a fairy tale. So this was the land that was given to the Manassites. Now look at their whole portion here, plus his brother Ephraim. Plus they had already had East Manasseh, the east side of the Jordan. Look what the children of Manasseh do. They come to Joshua here later in chapter 17. Said they couldn't drive out the people in the valley of Jezreel, or Armageddon. So in verse 14, it says, the people of Joseph said to Joshua, why have you given us only one allotment and one proportion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly. Joshua says, if you are so numerous, and if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves. There in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaites. The people of Joseph replied, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Bethshan and its settlements and those in the valley of Jezreel. But Joshua said to the tribes of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, you are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out. Can we say we can drive them out together? We can drive them out. Don't lose faith. I mean, they come to Joshua saying, you didn't give us enough land. Looking at the map, who should be crying out for not enough land? Should it be Manasseh, of all people? You didn't give us enough land. Because this whole fertile valley, by the way, doesn't count because we can't drive them out. You got to give us more land. Joshua says, you are very numerous and very powerful. And here again we see God divides according to the tribes. God knows what he's created you to do. He knows his purpose for you. He knows, like John Deere knows, the purpose for the excavator they created and what it should be able to accomplish. And he gives them that portion because he knows they should be able to drive them out with his help. But there was some doubt going on, some complaining. And I think at this time, Joshua was probably thankful that the land was distributed by lot rather than his own decree. But he says, if you want more land, go clear more of your own land. We got plenty of land. You can drive them out. Let's move on to chapter 18. we're getting there. In verses 1, let's start reading here in chapter 18. This is talking about the rest of the land being divided then. It says, the whole assembly of Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. Okay, let's just pause there. The three, you could say, most important tribes that received their, I say most important, but just the ones that were going to be most instrumental, tribe of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah, they received their portion, but now the other 7 tribes were kind of holding back. In the meantime, Joshua moves from Gilgal. Remember when they came across the Jordan, they set up their camp at Gilgal, just by Jericho there? They moved their camp from Gilgal up to Shiloh, and it says here they moved the tent of meeting up there. That's the tabernacle, and that's where the tabernacle was going to stay for another over 300 years until David would build a temple. Solomon would build a temple. That doesn't seem right though. Not 300 years. I think it was 1,300 years. Anyway, my dates there are a little bit questionable. But anyway, the capital would be moved. This would be the so-called capital of the promised land was Shiloh. So they set up the tent there, the tabernacle. Look at what Joshua tells the other 7 tribes. Let's pick up there in verse 1 yet. The country was brought under their control, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. So Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you? How long will you wait? Have I been taking possession of the land God has given me? Have I been prospering in the boundaries that He's put me in? How long will I wait till I'm going to go drive them out? So Joshua comes up with a little plan here to try to motivate them. He appointed 3 men from each tribe to send them out and survey the land. Take scrolls with you and write reports of all the towns and come back so that you know what you're getting into. And then you can go out and all each take your own land. Well, they came back, they brought this report, and they drew lots. And then in verse 11, it says, the first lot came up for the tribe of Benjamin, according to his plans. Their allotted territory lay between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. And looking at the map, I thought that was kind of fitting if you know the story of Benjamin and the whole, when the 12 brothers came down to Egypt. And Benjamin was kind of the baby treasured child, baby child maybe. But he's put sandwiched in here between the tribes of Joseph and Judah. Seemed very fitting. But yeah, I think we'll move on to chapter 19. But the key verse, I think, for us today, even in all these chapters, is chapter 18, verse 3. How long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you? What are we waiting for? I know it's getting hot in here. Our AC must not be working again. But let's just briefly look at chapter 19. This was the allotment for Simeon. And it goes down, as I was mentioning earlier in verse 9, the inheritance of the Simeonites was taken from the share of Judah because Judah's portion was more than they needed. So the Simeonites received their inheritance within the territory of Judah. God is a just and fair God, and He gives to each tribe according to what they needed. And we see at the end of chapter 19, verse 49 says, when they had finished dividing the land into its allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an inheritance among them. As the Lord commanded, they gave him the town he asked for, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built up the town and settled there. So Joshua finally gets his retirement home, and Joshua was of the tribe of Ephraim. So Caleb of the tribe of Judah, Joshua of the tribe of Ephraim or Joseph, these became the 2 kingdoms after they divided north and south of the promised land. And the last verse of chapter 19 says, and so they finished dividing the land. What a task. What a task was accomplished. This was actually each cutting the cake, so to speak. Each getting a piece of the pie. This is what all the conquest and the war and the campaigning was about, was to finally get to this place that was promised to them so many years ago. God had promised a land flowing with milk and honey that would be their inheritance. God was faithful in finally seeing them through. But we saw a couple of verses in there that were quite sobering about not being able to quite drive them all out. Why did God make the tribes conquer their own territories? Why did he say, okay, now let's divide up in tribes and you each go conquer your own territory? Why didn't he just wipe out all of them with hail and fire and brimstone and let them go in and settle? Sometimes we don't understand why does God make life so hard, you might say, just to be blunt. I think these verses that Dwayne read this morning have a big key to this answer. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. God wants us to seek him. It's not that he's far away. It's not that we got to chase him to the other side of the world or across our boundaries. God is right here within our own boundaries where he placed us. In the geographical place, in the family place. He just wants us to seek him. And sometimes it takes a lot more than it should to prompt us to seek him. Do we need a Joshua in our lives saying, how long will you wait? How long will you wait? Your national leader can only take you so far. There comes a time when you must seek out the promises of God for yourself. Your father, your pastor, your school teacher, your national leader can only take you so far. There's a time when you need to seek God's promises for yourself. And that time had come for the tribes here. You know, we read those verses about they could not drive them out. They could not drive the Jebusites out. Or the ones in the Valley of Armageddon. Where they would not, or were not able to. Actually, if you flip over into Judges chapter 1, after they've been there for a couple of years, Judges chapter 1 has a lot more sobering language like that. Verse 21, the Benjamites didn't drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. Verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Beit Shan or Megiddo. Verse 28, the Canaanites were forced to never drive out. 29, or Ephraim didn't drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer. 30, Zebulun didn't drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron. 31, Asher didn't drive out those living in Acco. 33, Naphtali didn't drive those out living in Beth-Shemesh. It goes on and on. Every tribe had some Canaanites that they couldn't drive out, or that they didn't drive out. Every tribe. There are things in all of our lives that are not conducive to our Christian life. Can we admit that? That's a fact that sometimes I think we're willingly ignorant to. Are we willing to admit that there's things in my life that are not conducive to the Christian life? Am I going to drive them out? Do I have the faith of Caleb to say, I will drive them out? With God's help, I will drive them out. Or do I need a Joshua to say, how long will you wait? How long will you wait? D.L. Moody has a famous quote that says, the world is yet to see what God can do with a man fully consecrated to him. By God's help, I aim to be that man. What could God do with us? What could God do with our church if each one of us were fully sold out willing to do whatever it took to drive out the Anakites in our lives. Not just to put them into forced labor. Sometimes we got these vices, these addictions in our lives, and we say, well, at least I'm making money off of it, or at least we justify it in some way. Most times we're losing money, but you can justify it in some way. We can live with this. Let's not be content to live with the Canaanites. Let's drive them out. This wasn't God's original plan. It reminded me of the parable of the pounds. Jesus gave 10 pounds, 5 pounds, and 1 pound. Remember that story? And he comes back, and the man with 1 pound says, well, I buried it. Jesus said, occupy till I come. Jesus was not happy, or the master there was not happy with the fact that he buried his pound. And maybe, I like the song Jesse led this morning, Build Your Kingdom Here. The message of that song is talking about expanding God's kingdom, taking back the kingdom, expanding our territory. What about the boundaries in our lives that God has set? Are we taking back those boundaries for the kingdom? Or are we content to just sit on it and try to survive in survival mode rather than in a tale of conquering mode? This life is your proving grounds. How are you doing? Are you performing as advertised? This is what Job said. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I have kept to his way without turning aside. I have not departed from the commands of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. Can that be our testimony? Can that be our testimony? This life is your proving ground. Have you been gaining territory since entering Canaan? Are there things that you are still driving out? I don't think that we ever totally arrive. It's okay, in a sense. I'm not saying it's okay to sit back, but it's okay to realize there's some things. It's actually good to realize there's things in our lives that need driven out. But are we actually attempting that, or are we content to just try to keep it under control at a manageable rate so they can at least maybe do some forced labor for us? If not, how long will you wait? You can drive them out. Can we say we can drive them out together? We can drive them out. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your faithfulness to being true to your word and your promises. Thank you for how you proved yourself to the Israelites over time and how that can be a lesson of encouragement to us. Help me in my life to be faithful in trusting you in your faithfulness and driving out those things that are pulling me back from experiencing the abundant life that you want for me. I pray that each one of us could experience more of you and take back more of that promised land that you've given to us. And that we as a church could claim your territory, and the territory here in Fredericksburg that you would have us to inhabit and to occupy till you come. That we would do it wholeheartedly, with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we wouldn't just sit back and expect you to hand it to us on a silver platter, but you have promised that you will give us the strength and the courage to do so if we trust in you. So I ask you to remind us of that, help us to be faithful in that. In Jesus' name.
All right, and we can't do that sitting down, can we? So let's stand up so we can conquer. You can grab your hymn books there, Songs of Faith and Praise, and turn to number 557. I think this is a fitting song to sing. 557. And for the ladies out there, it's talking to you too. Rise up, oh people of God, right? We're singing Rise Up, O Men, but Rise Up, O People. All right. Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. I'm just making up my own tune, I guess. Sorry, I don't know what those notes are doing, but they don't agree with me. Rise up, O men of God, His kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O men of God, the church for you doth wait. Her strength unequal to her task, rise up and make her great. Lift up the cross of Christ, tread where His feet have trod, as brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God. You may be seated.
All right. Well, we made sharing time.